Going live.
We have a microphone for the
Yeah, I'm testing stuff. Or you can go through.
This one through?
I think it's. Oh. Nope.
I think that one's for us.
I got you.
That's awesome.
I'd just like to say thank you for your help this afternoon, for your servant-heartedness, your kindness, your generosity with your time and knowledge. Think of living in a world where there are people who are talented, gifts like the ones given to you.
Nope.
My guy, Drew. You know, every time I see you, it seems that you're wearing blue. Drew, testing. Oh, that's better. Get there. Get there. Get there. Drew. Drew.
I like the shapes. I feel like I'm going to Oh, no. I'm good.
Any sophomores here that have a Dante Canto memorized that they would like to recite at this point?
That would be beautiful.
No, you don't have it memorized, or no, you don't want to share?
Is it me, Drew? Am I doing something wrong?
Nice. Like, I need to know how that system works here.
What do I know? I just work here.
You do?
You try a different microphone?
I was talking to Beth Packer years ago. I said something about her. She was like, "Isn't something there?"
Yep.
Who said that?
This one sounds like it's on.
That's funny.
That's great.
Is this one better? Mrs. Stanley tells me it's way better. So does Dr. Burke, I think it was. We good? Do I need to move that one first so that it doesn't squeal?
Probably.
So patient.
Yeah, there will be. 1 second.
Okay.
How's that sound, Drew?
You have any jokes?
The pastor said, "Well, please walk into the bar."
I'd be happy to do that. Do what? It sounds great, Drew. Well, not anymore. It did for a second.
Very young.
Maybe the key is to stand back a bit. Is there a monitor? Oh, it could be the monitor. Could it be the monitor, Drew? Towards me?
Not really.
Is that what you mean? Is that better? Okay. We good? Okay, Drew, one last thing, if you can. These lights are super, super bright.
Cool. That did happen.
Yep, that's it right there. That's great. Great. All right, I think everything's in order. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to this evening's senior thesis presentations. My name is Dr. Jonathan Wiley, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of teaching this year's seniors, both in their humanities course and in the senior thesis course. Tonight is the culmination of not just 1 year's worth of work, but really of many years worth of work, 12 or even 13 years worth of work. A good number of these seniors this evening have been at Covenant School since kindergarten. Mrs. Schaefer is here. Were you here when they had kindergarten? It's not, okay.
I was here.
Got it. And Mrs. Stanley from first grade is here, and I know that she had several of our seniors this year, so we're thrilled to have her with us. So thank you for being here. This is a key moment, and it's a time to celebrate what these young men and women have accomplished. We have 6 presenters tonight. We'll present them in kind of 2 blocks of 3. So each presenter will get about 25 minutes. They'll present their thesis in 8 to 10 minutes, where they'll give us a little presentation. And then the upper school faculty panel will have 12 to 15 minutes to follow up with some Q&A time. I didn't foresee that happening, but it has come from on high, and so what shall we do? So we'll unfold in 3s. So we'll have 3 students first, then about a 20-minute break, and then 3 more after that, and that'll be our evening. As we begin, I would love to pray for our students that the Lord would come and reign in their minds and hearts and open their mouths that they might rightly proclaim His truths. Would you join me in praying for this year's seniors? Gracious Lord and Heavenly Father, it is a distinct joy to be able to gather together. We thank you for these young men and women that you have brought to Covenant School and that you have entrusted into our care for this season of their life. Lord, as we begin this evening of senior thesis presentations and defenses, I ask for your peace to reign in the hearts and minds of our seniors. And I ask that you would help them to recall quickly and clearly the things that they have considered and read and written and contemplated. We ask, O Lord, that you would open up their lips and all of our lips that we might rightly proclaim your praise. Come, Holy Spirit, fill this room and be honored in our time together and in our discussion this evening. We ask all this in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Our first presenter this evening is Miss Emma Yeager, who has written a fine thesis exploring the nature of the Imago Dei. Emma?
So, most Christians understand that they're created in the image of God. Genesis 1:27 is a familiar verse to most churchgoers. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. But have you ever wondered what this means? What does it mean that humans are created in God's image? We don't physically look like God because God is not material, he's spiritual. Ancient gods needed a physical statue to interact with the people. But through the Imago Dei, God says, no, you are that image. What does this mean, though? Let's look at Genesis 5:1-3. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son of his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The same phraseology is used in this verse as in Genesis 1:27, image and likeness. Seth bore 2 images, so to speak, one of God and one of his parents. So do you and I. However, my identity as an image bearer of God is infinitely more significant than my identity as an image bearer of my parents. We can pinpoint why this is so by examining who Adam was, who God is, and what their human creations are likely to inherit from each of them. Adam was a sinful, mortal man. God is a being of divine glory, honor, and holiness. Seth inherited the sinful, mortal nature of his parents, along with a small replica of their character traits, physical appearance, and their habits. In the same way, humans inherit the communicable attributes of God. These are the attributes of God that humans also possess, but to a finite extent. For example, love, goodness, kindness, holiness, dignity, wisdom, among others. However, even these attributes fall short of imitating God fully. We're not holy like He is, we cannot love like He does, and we are not good as He is. And there are just some attributes of God that we will never possess. Some attributes not included in the Imago Dei package are omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, infinity, and aseity, to name a few. Along with His communicable attributes, God gave only one species out of all His created things the distinct ability to commune with Him. God has given the human race the ability to access Himself. The image of God is the relational element that gifts an individual with God's communicable attributes and enables them to access Him. While writing his book, De Trinitate, Augustine discovers truth about the Imago Dei. He reasons that he must first find where the Imago Dei is located in the human psyche before he may define it. I have scanned a helpful diagram that was included in my translation of De Trinitate. Augustine creates a hierarchy of the human psyche that ranges from world to God, temporal things to eternal things. Starting from the lowest point on the hierarchy, he found that this part of the psyche contains one's sensation ability, or the five senses. The next rung of this hierarchical ladder holds one's sense memory or imagination. These two parts of the psyche, sensation and sense memory, are the lowest parts of the hierarchy, which he attributes to the outer man, the part of the mind concerned with things outside the body, namely temporal things, transient things. Augustine reasons that the image of God is not located here because the image of God cannot be in something that will pass away. God is eternal, so his image must also bear an eternal quality. Man, or upper half of the psyche, contains scientia and sapientia. That's Latin for knowledge and wisdom. Augustine acknowledges that both wisdom and knowledge are in the inner man, so one of these things must be the image of God. In order not to be confused by his logic, you must cease to think of wisdom and knowledge in their textbook definitions. Bear with me. You can cease to think of these two words as the Bible references them. Augustine assigns new definitions to these words. He writes, "Knowledge of things divine is properly called wisdom, and of things human is properly given the name of knowledge." The image of God cannot be knowledge because there still lies one thing above it that is closer to God, which is wisdom. Think back to the hierarchy that I just put up here. He reasons that only in that part which is concerned with the contemplation of eternal things can one find something that is not only a trinity, but also the image of God. Therefore, Augustine concludes that the image of God is wisdom, or the ability to contemplate eternal things. A conclusion that furthers my claim that the Imago Dei is the gift of God's communicable attributes and the ability to access Him. The communicable attributes gives us the mental capacity to access God. And how can we access God without contemplating an eternal thing? After articulating what the Imago Dei is, Augustine brilliantly moves his discussion towards Christology. He says, if the difference between these two is that wisdom is attributed to divine things and knowledge to human, I acknowledge each of them in Christ, and so does every believer with me. A discussion of Christology inevitably follows our discussion of what the Imago Dei is, because Christ is called the image of God in Colossians 1:15. It says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation." So, how can humans be images of God when Christ is also called the image of God? Humans are imperfect images, broken by sin, but Christ is the perfect image of the divine nature of God. Not simply because he is God, but because he is fully human, the perfect man, the perfect human. He bears the image the way humans were always supposed to, before Genesis 3 and before sin. Our image was broken up by sin, repaired by Christ's work on the cross, and will be perfected when we come into the full glory of the one whom we bear the image of in heaven. Christ's work on the cross set in motion the restorative process that allowed humans the potential to one day either possess the perfected image in heaven or be deprived altogether of the image in hell. As C.S. Lewis states in his essay, The Weight of Glory, every single human will either be an immortal horror or an everlasting splendor. In other words, every human will either be one who is wholly deprived of the Imago Dei or one who bears the image of God in its perfection. The Imago Dei is a divine calling, one that is ignored by many and realized by few. In cultivating the Imago Dei, the Missio Dei is being fulfilled. The first place the Imago Dei and the Missio Dei mingle is in education. Think of the image of God as a dust-covered artifact in the attic of one's mind. Education ascends the stairs to this attic, passes sensation, sense memory, and knowledge, and arrives at the dust-covered image. Education proceeds to blow the dust off this image, polish it, and reverently place it back on the highest pedestal in the attic. The artifact or image was always present in the attic. However, when polished, it could better reflect what it was meant to be. I realize that not all schools are in the business of directing students' minds towards things of God, as Covenant is. But where many schools lack the contemplating eternal things part of the Imago Dei, the church can make up. Education in the church should work hand in hand in fulfilling the Missio Dei by cultivating the Imago Dei. Schools are already polishing the minds of students, but it's up to the church to direct these minds towards God. I believe this is called evangelism. Obviously, the Imago Dei holds far-reaching implications. I could not possibly cover all of them tonight. One of the biggest questions of all time is, why does human life matter? Without the Imago Dei, it is very hard to articulate why it does. Human life is intrinsically valuable because the imprint of the Maker is on every single human being. He has stamped his identity on you. In conclusion, I hope you join me in my desire to steward this gift and heed the calling that is placed on me as a believing bearer of the Imago Dei, holding to the glorious promise that one day this precious but damaged gift will be perfected in me. Allow me to close with an excerpt from Augustine's concluding prayer in his De Trinitate. Before you lies my strength and my weakness. Preserve the one, heal the other. Before you lies my knowledge and my ignorance. Where you have opened to me, receive me as I come in. Where you have shut to me, open to me as I knock. Let me remember you. Let me understand you, and let me love you. Increase these things in me until you refashion me entirely. Amen.
You know, let me begin by saying that I'm really impressed by your thesis. For a senior thesis, this is you've really put your heart and soul into this thing. Most of you probably don't know this, but one was maybe in November or something. I handed a book to Emma called De Trinitate, the book that she just quoted here. And I said, Emma, you need to go read chapter 15 of De Trinitate. And I loaned her my copy. And she brought it back 2 or 3 days later and said, no, Dr. Wiley, I'm going to just buy my own because I have to mark this thing up. And then over Christmas, she spent the whole time on the couch, as I understand it, just reading the entire book from cover to cover and taking notes on it. And so I commend you. This is a really, really thoughtful and well-written, well-researched essay. One of the marks of a great essay is that it generates a bunch of questions, and so I'm trying to decide which one I want to ask. So I want to draw your attention to page 13, where you have a short section titled "The Image Perfected." And I'm thrilled to see you go here, but I sort of felt like you left me wanting. How do I, practically speaking, how can a Christian hope to be restored? Right? So you talk about Jesus is the perfect, but Paul talks about Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And texts like John 1 come to mind here, right? In him we have beheld
the fullness of God's glory, full of grace and truth. How do I, as a Christian, right, like how do I respond, practically speaking, to like cooperate with God in his process of recreating that image in me?
Good question. I would say the Missio Dei is the answer. And as I said, in cultivating the Imago Dei, the Missio Dei is being fulfilled. And what is the mission of God, or the Missio Dei? It's to, the mission of God, I mean, obviously this is very broad, but is to see the church brought up and the kingdom of God to come to earth. I mean, we say that the kingdom of God is now, but it's not yet. And so I think the way that we can sort of look to the image being perfected and prepare ourselves for the image being perfected is to start actively taking steps to fulfill the Missio Dei, which I think that we are all doing. I mean, it's not a formula that we have to follow, but churches involved in missions, schools like Covenant, teaching God and teaching its students to contemplate eternal things is preparing students to be one day perfected in glory.
Well done, Emma. I wanted to commend you specifically for actually understanding Augustine, because I think that you did, which is really just that is an impressive thesis on its own, because as you now know, having read De Trinitate, it's not at all easy or clear in a lot of cases what he's talking about. But if nothing else, you, I think, understand Augustine. Like you basically are right about what he's saying. So that is not an easy thing on its own. So well done to have understood Augustine on one thing is a big accomplishment. So that's it. This is the question that gets asked of Augustine, and so I think it's a good question to ask of you, because in a lot of ways your thesis is assuming Augustine is right, but the pushback on Augustine on Imago Dei is frequently this. So you address it with babies and non-Christians, but I think the more difficult one is, how is somebody who has some sort of mental handicap or inability, because you have these levels, right? And there are people who seemingly are born without the ability to have even the lower level, much less the higher level. And now with babies, it's like you can say, well, the possibility is there. They will have it soon, right? How does somebody who will never in this life be able to actually contemplate God, be made in the image of God? What do you think? How do you think Augustine responded to that? How would you respond to that? That's a hard criticism of his view that we need to think through. So does that make sense?
It does. And that was my first response, or my first question to reading how Augustine says that, the ability to contemplate eternal things, wisdom, is the image of God in humans. I thought of that, and then I thought of babies, and then do non-Christians bear a less of an image than we do? And the thing that I would say is, the reason I want to add a little more to what Augustine said, not that I should add to Augustine, but I do want to, and say that that's why I said I added in the communicable attributes of God, because what are those? They're dignity and his holiness. And in a way, I'm not sure if I have a distinct answer to this question, because I've thought about it a lot. Actually, I thought about it last night and wondered if one of you would ask that question, and now it's happening. But Augustine, in a way, addressed this, and if I remember the quote correctly, he says, the mind is always the image of God potentially, but it is activated by an act of thought. And I think I put that in my thesis. I did. And I think that's his way of addressing, saying, no, some people don't bear more of an image. Some people don't bear less of an image if they have a mental handicap, or babies. The mind is always there, but there are ways that we can cultivate it. We can cultivate the Imago Dei. And so I don't have a very distinct answer to that question, but
I'm gonna ask one more while I pass it down to Ms. Arvette.
Oh, no, you stole my question. I don't need it.
Oh, okay. Then I'll just ask one more and we'll see who is next. Does that mean anything about, can you be, I'll just ask this. Just think about Augustine and what you think. I just want to hear what your answer is. Will people have mental handicaps in heaven?
No. We will have glorified bodies, right? I would say no. We will not.
Good answer.
Yes.
I have plenty of questions I can ask, but I'm happy to.
I have more too, but
I mean, as I said, the mark of a great thesis is one that gives rise to lots of questions. So here we go. Emma, I'm going to take you to a place that's probably going to be no surprise to you, which is your discussion of Paul and 1 Corinthians 11, where you say that this is a tricky passage. I know you wrestle with, right? Where Paul says, I'm on page, where am I, 4 of your thesis? No, 5. And you say, well, no, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11:7, for a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. And you're citing this in reference to the fact that Augustine and some certain other church fathers argued that Adam bore the image of God and woman bore the image of man, but not of God, right? So you're trying to set that aside. And you say that what Paul means there is this. You say, we could read this verse like this: since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the, then you supply, image of God and glory of man. I just want to ask you to flesh that out and give a justification for what licenses you to insert those words there.
I don't know if anything licenses me to insert those words like into Paul's inspired writing of scripture, but I would say it doesn't seem, the reason I am adding that is because it does not, the claim that woman is the glory of man and that implies that woman is not the image of God is not consistent with the rest of scripture that we see. So it seems that there must be something missing in that verse, or something that Paul's not saying, but he assumes it will be implied, and little to his knowledge, later in the history of the church fathers that are prominent will take that verse to mean that woman was not created in the image of God and then demote them as second-class citizens. So I read that verse and thought, well, maybe Paul is just not putting image of God twice. Maybe he's trying to say something here that I am not seeing, but that's what I thought. I wrestled with that verse, and that is the conclusion that I came to. It's not a satisfying conclusion, but
I agree with your conclusion.
mm-hmm.
It's your argumentation that I'm trying to draw out, because we're going to get to the same place. It's just the route by which we get there. I kind of think that really what would have served your case is two things. One, just go back to Genesis 1, right? Male and female, he created them. In the image of God, he created them, right? It's plural. But then the other place that I think you could, that you might find some fuel for your argument is to just keep on reading what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, right? Where he goes on, he's talking here about marriage, right? Or at least like male-female relationships, particularly as they work out in the church and in the life of prayer. He goes on to say, nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman, right? In the Lord, we're all in this together. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman, and all things are from God. So I think if you try to like kind of untangle some of that, and this is a notoriously difficult passage, so props to you for going here, but I think if you had tried to untangle some of this, you might have found some ways that even this passage might actually, in a way, kind of work this out for you. The point is, I think you need to dig into that a little bit more, right? It's not sufficient to just kind of say what he means in this one verse is this and then move on. No, you need to exegete the passage. Go get the commentaries, pull them off the shelf, and dig in and keep reading in the passage. Give a full-scale treatment. Does that make sense?
Right.
But really what you got to do is you got to go learn Greek, so you can do all that in Greek. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on what you're saying. So on that verse you were speaking about where it says, but woman was created for the glory of man. Think about the English word but. It has two meanings. So it would be interesting to go back to the Greek and see which meaning it's referring to. The word but can mean and as a conjunction. So if you think of it as and woman was created to glory for man, that doesn't deny that she was created with the image of God. But can also mean except. So search out and see which meaning the but means there for that conjunction, because it does not necessarily deny, as you said, but with the supporting of the other scripture. So.
Sorry, I'm gonna have one more. This is interesting to me. You say the word activate a lot. You talk about the image of God being activated. And so I'm looking at page 18, where you're talking about schools that will tend to leave that out and therefore not activate the image of God. And it made me want to ask you this. Do you think that it's like an on or off thing, or do you think it's like always on but directed towards different things? Because activated sounded like you were imagining there's like these levels to the human, but then the top part doesn't get turned on sometimes. Do you think that's how it works, or do you think that Augustine is saying that it's always on? The question is, what is it doing? Does the difference make sense?
Yes, it does. And same question came to me when I read Augustine. I got the word activate from Augustine, or the translation that I read. And I would say, again, Augustine was very hard to read in this regard. I wasn't sure exactly what he meant, but I would say that, as I said, the image of God is present in every single human. I believe that. I believe that the church affirms that. But just as Christians, like, in a way, Christians bear the image of God in the same way a non-Christian does. But Christians can use the Imago Dei for a greater purpose, to further the Missio Dei. And so in activating the Imago Dei, people kind of are at a crossroads. Like, I mean, public schools, activate the mind, and it's up to the church to direct that mind towards God. And the image of God is, I guess, won't be fully activated until we reach heaven. So I would say that the mind is always the image of God, but it can be activated for a greater purpose, if that makes sense.
You have 2 seconds. Let's start that with like 2 seconds.
Sorry, this is related to a question that was asked at the very beginning, but you just reminded me of it. So going back to like what about the mind or wisdom makes a person have the Imago Dei, I'm now asking, because we talked about like the potential and like imperfection and being perfected. What about people who not just like lack cognitive ability, but who lack like the ability to have a moral conscience, like psychopathy, things like that? Like, does that person still, in what way does that person still reflect the glory of God or the image of God?
Can you say the last part again? I could not.
In what way does that still reflect God's image? Like, how does the Imago Dei manifest in a person who has no moral conscience or like literally no brain activity?
Okay.
Either of those things.
Okay. I would say that the Imago Dei is still in that person, because the communicable attribute of dignity and holiness and the potential to do all of these things is still in that person, particularly dignity and holiness of God, which is why I'm hesitant to just agree with Augustine and say that it's just the ability to contemplate eternal things, because not all people can do that, but that doesn't mean that they're any less created in the image of God. So does that answer your question?
Partially, I think.
Yes.
You're fine.
Okay. No, I'm sorry. I can try to answer it again if you want to say it again.
You're fine. Let me wrap this up by saying, I'm and all of us are really proud of you. You've written a really, really solid thesis, and you're very talented, and we look forward to seeing how God uses your gifts in the years to come. Would you join me again, everyone, in congratulating him on a very good season? Our next presenter this evening is Mr. Liam Allen, who has written a thesis entitled Sin, Is It What Makes Us Human or What Makes Us Less Human? Do we have it with us?
Evening, everyone. So tonight we'll be talking about sin. It's a topic that we hear a lot about in church, school for us. It's bad, don't do it, you go to hell if you do it, all that stuff. But I feel like something we don't talk about enough is the true weight of what sin does to our humanity, okay? And when we look at it, I think that sin is ultimately it's going to be what makes us less human, okay? And before we get into that, I want us to look at an image here, okay? So here we have Adam and Eve at the tree. We've got Satan in the tree handing them the fruit. And for just a second, I want you to think about what's happening at this moment, okay? And we'll come back to this image at the end. But just for a moment, think about what's happening here, what the circumstances are, and what's changing. All right, so I'll just start out with what is sin, all right? So just to start real simple, we'll look at the Merriam-Webster, okay? The Merriam-Webster definition is the transgression of the law of God or a vitiated state of human nature in which the self is estranged from God. I think these are both really good definitions. I especially like the second definition, where sin is what separates us from God. So with that, I want to look at a quote from C.S. Lewis in The Weight of Glory. Indeed, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward, the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. So what's happening here is Lewis is trying to tell us that humans almost have too short of a will or too weak of a will to be able to strive for true happiness, and instead they settle for almost an artificial happiness that the world has provided us in an abundant stock. We lack strong enough wills to naturally want to put in the effort to receive infinite joy, and rather we're pleased to use sin as a means to achieve a perverted happiness. Sin is, in a sense, an easier way for people to achieve this small dose of fake happiness. So next, I want to talk about where is sin coming from. Now that we've discussed that sin is almost a cheat for fake happiness, let's look at James 1, verses 13 through 15. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So if God doesn't have anything to do with the evil that is presented in our lives, this poor means of achieving a artificial happiness, who does? So I want to look at Genesis chapter 3. This is where the fall of man happens, okay? Genesis 3 is where we're in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve have a perfect life, okay? They have dominion over all the animals. They have only one rule, okay? That one rule is don't eat from that tree. What happens? Satan comes over. He says, hey guys, you guys will learn some really neat stuff. You'll get the knowledge of good and evil if you eat that fruit right there, okay? So Adam and Eve use this means, and by doing so, they take this almost shortcut to achieve some kind of new pleasure or happiness in their new knowledge. I want to look at Proverbs chapter 9, and we're going to see the ways of wisdom and the way of folly set beside each other. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself. If you scoff, you alone will bear it. So this is the way of wisdom. Now I want to compare that with the way of folly. The woman folly is loud. She's seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. So something that's interesting between these two ways, the way of folly and the way of wisdom, is the similarities in which they're calling out to the common passerby. They're both calling out to whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And they're both offering good things. They're offering food at their table, drink, and they're offering a sense of happiness. What the difference is, though, folly is offering stolen water, bread eaten in secret, whereas wisdom is going to be integrous with her ways of acquiring this happiness, this sense of happiness for her followers. So this sin is coming from a sense of perverted means of trying to achieve happiness. Now, I would like to look at false happiness versus true happiness. So in Boethius's book on the consolation of philosophy, he talks about the differences between these in book 3, chapters 7 and 8. So first, when Boethius talks about false happiness, he's going to talk about how everything that the world can offer us is going to only end in pain and sorrow. Okay, this is all our false happiness. Nothing on the earth can make us truly happy. So to find this true happiness, we're going to need to find a supreme being, a truly happy being that can provide this for us. So Boethius starts by stating that sufficiency has absolutely nothing to do with riches, power, honor, fame, or happiness. He's doing this to establish that this self-sufficiency has nothing to do with anything worldly. Further into his argument, he's going to say that this supremely happy being that is self-sufficient is therefore going to be able to do anything independently. They're going to be worthy of glory and reverence. And this is our supremely happy being. So we know that we need a supremely happy being, and we're going to need a link to the supremely happy being. So we're going to look to the Imago Dei. We know that God is the supremely happy being. He's self-sufficient. He's fully independent. He's worthy of honor and reverence. So the Imago Dei is going to be our link to the supremely happy being. Genesis 1:26 says, then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So at this point in time, God is bestowing on man something truly unique that is setting man apart from all other creatures. He's bestowing upon man the likeness to himself. This is going to be our link to him. This is going to be our link to true happiness. So now I want to look at how we can put these two links, sin and the Imago Dei, together into dehumanization. So the Imago Dei was the first gift to humans. This is what makes us unique. This is what our first link to true happiness was. This is what allowed us access to that. However, at the fall, sin was introduced as a fake means to try to achieve an artificial, fleeting glimpse of something that was not had previously, a fleeting glimpse of happiness. So when humans started to use sin rather than the image of God to access happiness, they gave up their access to true happiness and started settling for false worldly happiness because they were not going through the only source of true happiness. So by replacing the image of God, our only defining characteristic as humans, they started to take away from that which makes us human. They started to dehumanize themselves. And by doing so, we are quite literally taking away from our humanity, our being human. So I want to take a look at this picture again that I pulled up earlier. Before the fall of man, God had gifted humans with the image of God, all right? This was our perfect link with him. This was our glimpse of true happiness that we could access if we followed God's commands. However, sin was introduced. Man found it preferable or easier to use that link to get a small dose of fake happiness. And from this moment on, man became less human and had a tainted image of God.
Thank you, Leah, and congratulations on a solid thesis. Some of the things that I really appreciate about your thesis, you did not have the chance to take the medieval humanities class when you were a sophomore. Nevertheless, you pulled Boethius off the shelf and put him to good use, and that encouraged me. I also love the way that you've drawn Athanasius in and Augustine in, so you've done a good job pulling on the great tradition to answer a really important question. So I commend you for that. It's a solid thesis, so well done. I want to start with a really, I guess, a big question that has a right or wrong answer in my mind. Let's see if you get it right. This is fishing what I'm doing here. This is a leading question. If you were going to write 5 or 10 more pages on this thesis, what would you say?
I would probably add a lot more of what Athanasius has to say to start off.
Okay.
I'm missing the lead that I
This is a day in the life of Dr. Wiley. Just throwing out leads, and sometimes they win, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah,
What I'm getting at is that to put this in Lutheran terms, he gave us a lot of law and not a lot of gospel.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's 15 or so pages of thoughtful examination of what sin does, and I got to the end of it, and I thought, oh, that's well done. But tell me some good news.
Okay. So you're looking for application on this.
I wanted you to say something beautiful about the gospel, you know. And I say this because I have written things before and submitted them, and I sat on it, and I thought, I feel like I just missed an opportunity to say something glorious about the gospel. So I offer this to you as like sort of a personal reflection. When you get an opportunity to share the good news, share the good news, right? You've told us what sin is. You've told us how destructive it is. And at the end of your thesis, I said, yeah, but how can we put it back? No, that's not the right way to say it. What has God done to put it back together, and how can we participate in that? 5 more pages, brother. Give me that good news. Right?
All right.
Hello. So I am looking at, well, first off, well done on the discussion of how it ultimately dehumanizes us by making us less like God, less like our intended purpose in bearing the Imago Dei. I want to draw some attention to something that was brought up on page 5 of your thesis, which I think you answered a little bit later on, but maybe not fully. So you talked about sin being inspired by Satan, essentially, because no evil comes from God. And you talked about James 1:13 through 15, is it? Which says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. And then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. And then you said that God does not have to do with the evil in our lives if he does, implying Satan. However, I would point out that James doesn't say that Satan is the cause of sin. He says that we sin because of our desires. Likewise, the Apostle Paul spends a good deal of Romans talking about sin and temptation and the desire to sin and why we sin, but he doesn't talk about Satan at all until almost the end of the book. So I guess, how does this relate to like the sin nature of human beings? Like at what point do we stop blaming Satan and start blaming ourselves and our own wickedness?
So I think this ties in a lot to the fall. I think that that's a blank that can be filled in with what James is saying. Because at the beginning, Satan planted a seed of doubt in what God had provided for man. And I think that that seed of doubt is what spurred man on to try to make their own means to achieve something else that God had forbidden them from. And I think that seed of doubt kind of carries on through all the doctrine of original sin. I think that that has transferred itself through generations, and that seed of doubt has kept sin alive, I feel like, amongst other worldly desires. But I think that that seed of doubt that Satan started is what's spurring that on.
Liam, I have a question for you, and I'd like to say this question, this entire thesis was an idea I had never thought about sin as dehumanizing us, because it is so popular for us to believe that the fact that we sin is what makes us human, as opposed to divinity. But on page 12, somewhere in your thesis, you say, the image of God is unique to man and is not carried by any other creature in all of creation, because this is our defining characteristic. This is what makes us human. To be human is to bear the Imago Dei, and to bear the Imago Dei is to be human. So you equate the two, yet your thesis is saying that when we sin, that dehumanizes us, but you're saying to be human is to bear the Imago Dei. Are you connecting the two and asserting that when we sin, we are somehow affecting the Imago Dei within us?
Okay, so I talked about this a little bit, and I probably could have talked about it more, how the image of God is a perfect place. It's a perfect thing because it is the likeness of God. It's a little place that God dwells within us. And God does not partake in sin. He is not part of it. He did not make it. And when we introduce sin into an environment with God, the two just are completely incompatible. And I think that when we bring sin into the equation, we're starting to push God out of our psyches in a way. And I think that's where we start to get into the dehumanization, is when we start to push out the image of God, which is what makes us human, and replace it with sin, just because the two are so incompatible, and because God is not of sin, and he does not himself sin.
Thank you.
Great job, Liam. These are really complicated ideas that you went after, and you made some complicated ideas clear, especially your discussion on evil as being a perverted good. That's a really complicated idea, and you unpacked it really well. So, to be commended for taking on a difficult subject. I had two questions for you. One is a little bit of a fishing question again, but it's to say, what do you think is if you're making this thesis that sin is to make us less human, what's the opposition? Like, who disagrees with you? What would that thesis be that you're saying? People say this, but I'm saying it's dehumanizing. What's the opposite, and how does that make your thesis a contribution or a disagreement with somebody, right?
So, throughout writing this thesis, the main saying that I was arguing against was to sin is to be human, kind of like what Mrs. Archer had mentioned. I pretty much argued against that group, and I myself said that for a while, but then when I unpacked it, I started to look at it a little more closely, and I saw that to sin is to be less human. And I feel like that group is almost formed by just not looking deeply enough at the incompatibility of sin and the image of God. But I feel like that group can agree with me just if we really unpack what it means to have the image of God and what sin really is.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would think as you're thinking this paper forward and adding the 5 pages that Dr. Wiley wants you to add.
Yeah, that'll be Monday.
The rest of the week to finish. I think that's also a good one to consider is unpacking your opposition a bit more and saying, let's press into that and think, what are they really saying? Is that plausible at all? Really think it through and try to make that view as compelling as possible so that your disagreement with it is sharper. So then my second question would be, you talk about dehumanizing, being less human. What does that really mean? It's a kind of a metaphor in some ways, and it's easy to kind of get stuck there in the metaphor land, but to be less human, like to literally get smaller, what does it mean to become less in this case?
So I think that gets into our purpose and what we were created as. We were created with just the image of God, and we were created with a purpose to serve and glorify God. And the Imago Dei, I believe, is our means of doing so. And sin, as it replaces the Imago Dei, pushes it out. That pushes out our means of serving that purpose and our will to serve that purpose.
What about just unhappiness? Is that what you mean when you say less? Sometimes I gathered when you unpacked it, it felt like the less was to be unhappy.
I think that happiness is part of it too, because ultimately in the end, our reward for glorifying God and serving Him is going to be true happiness, and being with Him and the Imago Dei is our access to that true happiness while on earth. It's our glimpse, our preview before we move on to heaven.
Awesome. Is there, last one, sorry, you're doing great, so I'll just keep going. Is it possible to sin so much that you're not a human being anymore?
I don't think it is, but I think it is possible to nearly make yourself inhuman, but I don't think it's possible to fully lose what God has given us.
So you can get just really close to the line, like infinitely close.
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like at the very edge there? Like, what's that life look like? You're right at the very bottom, right? Almost under the line of being human.
I think it looks like probably hell. I think it would look like being in hell, where we're eternally dehumanized.
Maybe that's not.
My question has to do with that true happiness idea. So while we're in that topic, I'll ask this. You quote Louis is saying, this is page 11 of your thesis. True and perfect happiness is that which makes a man self-sufficient. And then later on in that same quote, true happiness is found in God, a being who is self-sufficient. So God self-sufficient, true happiness comes from there. Do you think man here on earth can become fully self-sufficient. And as, depending on your answer there, I guess, therefore, can a man ever be truly happy here on earth?
I don't think a man can be truly happy here on earth because our image of God has been tainted by sin. I think that sin has taken away our ability to fully see true happiness.
So when do we get to see it?
I think we get to see it when we get to heaven, when we're living with God.
Well, you read Boethius. What would Boethius say? How can human beings, who is the supremely happy being?
I mean, that's God.
Right. God is the supremely happy being because happiness is the presence of everything good all at one time, right? The possession of everything good simultaneously. So what Boethius would want to say is you've got to live into God, right? You have to participate in divinity if you're going to be happy. Last question, I think. This is an underhand law, just for the Bible scholar, okay? What's really the question in Genesis 3? Like if the serpent comes and says, did God really say? And he's holding out the fruit. Right, I know what the text says. I know what the serpent says, but what's really the question?
I think he's asking, is God's offer to you good enough? Are you happy with that?
Are you happy? Liam, once again, very, very well written thesis, researched well, great job. I'm very proud of you. And this has been a lot of fun to read and to contemplate. So thank you for your work here.
Thank you.
We're more or less back on schedule at this point, so why don't we take a short break, about 5 minutes, and we'll reconvene here in just 5 minutes or so for Zachary Moyer's thesis. DJ next, excuse me.
It's like understood and it's the ones that they're like tackling really good questions. All of them. Well, this It's no small amount of basketball this summer. So I'm looking forward to this summer.
I got first. Just the one I said.
Steps in. You know, majority of people have not really he's fresh, ready. Yeah. Calls back to order.
Fancy trade those nights?
Yeah.
They're delicious.
Yeah, probably a
Oh, you're doing good.
Thank you, sir.
Well done,
Fancy
Drew.
trade those nights?
Oh, I'm in the. I just realized. Forgot that's the live stream going on.
We're good to go?
Yeah, I think we're good. I was trying to see if there's anything like why it was cutting out or anything. But yeah, it's, it's a live stream.
Drew? Am I on? If we could try to.
Yeah, I'll get it on. I muted it for a second.
Those are great questions, sir.
Thank you. You as well.
Mine are mostly points. It's like an SEO comment. I'm going to raise my hand as if I'm going to ask a question.
I want to say.
But I'm going to basically just tell you what I think you should have said.
I would like to put in on my question is just really self-serving. Talk about like science, how do we use that? Good. And I really just wanted to say, that's what it's doing. Yeah. But I like the self-serving. I have better questions like
I think it's good.
If I could draw everybody back together for our third paper. Do we have DJ? You gotta button that button, right? Our third paper this evening is Mr. DJ Strawberry, who has written a thoughtful thesis on the practical implications of personal liturgies.
All right. I want us to start off by imagining two scenes. That changed. Cool. One being Saturday, with everyone residing at the football stadium. Fans gathering together, partying, rooting for their favorite teams, and cooking their favorite foods. Now let's go to a Sunday, where friends and families come together at a cathedral, where in harmony as a unit, pursue a love for their belief. At first glance, these two images seem to be very innocent. But what if we dove deeper into discovering what the true implications of them are? Today, we're going to investigate exactly that. We will discover what a liturgy is, how it can shape our being, and how it can be used appropriately. You see, both these images presented contain cultural liturgies. According to James K. Smith in his book, You Are What You Love, cultural liturgies refer to how human cultures teach us to worship. He says that humans have wants and desires that need to be filled, and a way that we fix this problem is by worshiping things, even if we know it or not. Liturgies are practices, rituals, or habits that are not merely the things that we do, but that do something to us. Smith often uses the word formative in reference to liturgies, pointing to their power to shape who we are. You see, love is something that takes practice, and through repetition, liturgies come from what we love, or at least what we think we love. So since liturgies have such significant power to mold us into our future selves, then we need to choose carefully what kinds of loves we choose to be a part of. I believe Augustine would agree with us on doing such. Augustine explains that disordered loves mean that we often love less essential things more and more essential things less. And this leads to unhappiness and disorder in our lives. James says the same thing Augustine says. In James chapter 4, 1-3, it says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive. When you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures." James tells us that people are sad because they don't have their loves in order, and therefore they chase the wrong things, which ultimately leaves them unsatisfied with themselves and their place in life. This is why everyone's loves must be put in a correct order. Otherwise, our disordered loves have the potential to put us at odds with God and a relationship with Him. Augustine actually further goes on to describe a situation in which shows us that if we don't have our loves in order, we begin to chase after evil things. In Augustine's book, Confessions, he writes of his friend Alypius, a young man drawn and enticed by the bloodlust of the gladiatorial games in Rome. Alypius went to Rome to study law, which was the way of his worldly parents. One day, after his friends got back from dinner, they invited Alypius to go to the Colosseum with them. Alypius, hesitant at first, eventually is persuaded to come along, but protests to them, saying, "Though you drag my body to that place and set me down there, you cannot force me to give my mind or lend my eyes to these shows. Thus I will be absent while present, and so overcome both you and them." Sadly for Alypius, moments after hearing a fighter fall and meet his own demise, he quickly becomes addicted to the violent sights, sounds, and smells of the Colosseum. Augustine shows us that from Alypius' experience, he became more miserable than the actual fight. The message that is being pushed across here is that, as I said in the beginning, we must prioritize the liturgies we want to be pursued. The liturgies we follow will ultimately guide us to what we are truly wanting or love. Augustine uses one final example that was actually his own experience. Here he confesses about the liturgies he once followed during his youth. When he followed his worldly desires, driven by the wicked world around him, and how it managed to act in departing from him from God. Augustine says, "Stage plays also carried me away, full of images of miseries and fuel to my fire. Why is it that man desires to be made sad, beholding doleful and tragic things, which yet himself would know mean suffering? Yet he desires as a spectator to feel sorrow at them. This very sorrow is his pleasure. What is this but a miserable madness? For a man is the more affected with these actions, the less free he is from such affections. However, when he suffers in his person, it is used to be styled misery. When he compassionates others, then it is mercy. But what sort of compassion is this for feigned and scenic passions? The auditor is not called on to relieve, but only to grieve. And he applauds the actor of these. Fictions the more he grieves. And if the calamities of those persons, whether of old times or mere fiction, be so acted that the spectator is not moved to tears, he goes away, disgusted and criticizing. But if he is moved to passion, he stays intent and weeps for joy." Augustine brings to light that this act of drinking in the actor's false emotion or character, that he is searching for something to fill the void he has. He is searching for a love to worship. The act of him going to the theater and watching the play is simply the liturgy that helps guide him in the direction of the love he is searching for. Augustine feels he is helping reinforce an unhealthy liturgy in himself to further his grief. In both of Augustine's examples, we see liturgies at work leading some final destination. The final destination being that love which you were initially seeking. We see that liturgies are always acting to simply train our desires and guide us to what we seek to love. For instance, in both of Augustine's examples, worldly desires were put forth before the overarching good desire. The overarching good desire being God, of course. Augustine states, "By the same token, anyone who perversely loves the goodness of any nature whatsoever, even if he attains the enjoyment of it, becomes evil in the enjoyment of the good, and wretched in being deprived of a higher good." In response to this, I believe Augustine would say that we must take part in liturgies that cultivate in us habits that lead us to God. If we do this, our loves will follow suit with one another, with God being at the forefront. This ultimately will prevent us from ending up in the same situation Alypius and Augustine got in. So how can we apply Augustine's examples into our own lives? Let us start with Alypius. As we know, Alypius was utterly against the Colosseum and despised it. Though just like Eve was tempted by Satan, Alypius' friends convinced him just to try it one time. And as Adam and Eve learned, so did Alypius, that giving something a one-time go can have a result that changes you and your relationship with God. Augustine wants us to stay away from the things of such worldly nature. When we as humans who have a sin nature, allow ourselves to conform to sin, then we lose our ultimate prized possession, or one of our ultimate prized possessions, one of which being our relationship with God. So how do we avoid following in Alypius' footsteps and stay on the right track? Though we are human, being in a sinful world, and being in sinful existence, we must put God first. Augustine gives us several guidelines to follow and also offers his views on a few examples relevant to the worldly desires we are addressing. Augustine had a greater understanding of human nature Augustine had a greater understanding of human nature and the features of our being that most people don't understand today. While this is true, we must remember Augustine also had human nature, which makes him vulnerable to going in the wrong direction as well. The only way we can pursue the good liturgy is to do as Augustine did, which was to try to love and respect God and the things he has made. It is the only way to put an end to idolatry. If we let our love end in a lesser good, our love for it will become supreme and thus indispensable. In Augustine's own words, He loves thee too little, who loves with thee anything he loves not for thy sake. To conclude, I believe that liturgies in today's modern world can train us to follow many paths, but it is ultimately our decision to choose the way that we find fit for us. Augustine brings to light that yes, there are many paths you can follow, and each will give you a different result. With this being said, we must be wary of the paths we choose. Some paths are good, and some paths are inherently bad. With Augustine's examples and opinions, he provides us of both the Colosseum and the theater. We can see the result of following the worldly, sin-oriented path. We, as humans, will always, until we part from this earth, be haunted by sin. Sin will find us wherever we go. Even if we claim to be Christians and know our standing with God, we will at some point in our lives fall into sin. It is our nature. Human beings are not a perfect creation. But with this being said, it is not to grant us a path in following a worldly, sin-oriented path. Augustine allows us to see how we can stop ourselves from following the wrong liturgies and instead follow the proper liturgies that will guide us to God. When we choose to set ourselves apart from our worldly desires and put God at the forefront is when we will see a genuine change and a true path open before us.
DJ, well done. Thank you. I want to start by commending you. This is a solid thesis, and I really enjoyed interacting with it. And well done. I'm really proud of you for this. And I also want to say you were really squirming today about the presentation part of things. I mean, we'll see what questions Miss Arvette comes up with, right? But that was a really well done, well composed presentation. Well done, bro. You got talent. That's great. I want to start off with a big picture question. You spent a lot of your thesis talking about Alypius's trip to the Colosseum, which happens how many times?
What do you mean?
How many times does it go to the Colosseum?
Just once.
One time. Is that a liturgy?
I would say yes, because the one time he goes, he eventually never stops. It eventually just worked into his life.
So he goes back to the Colosseum a bunch of times?
Yes.
Okay. Follow up. What's not a liturgy?
That's a good question. It's well done.
I'm really glad I came to work today. Very firm.
Me too. I'm very tempted to say that I've never thought about it from that point of view before, like I was given advice from Miss Archer, if I don't know the question. But also at the same time, I'm torn to say that I feel like a lot of the things that we do, or almost everything we do, is a liturgy. It's just the matter of what direction you want to take it in, and that's how we can see if it is a good or bad.
Okay, I respect that. If everything we do is a liturgy, then does the word liturgy have any meaning? Like if it means everything, if it's just basically a synonym for event or stuff we do, then does it mean anything?
I feel like it still does.
Okay.
I mean, like I said before, we have the choice to decide what liturgies we want to be a part of, and whether we want them to be good or bad ones, right?
Sure.
And even though if we're going to say if liturgies, like, what did you say again? You said liturgies, like, why does it even matter if it's basically
if it means just anything we do, even one time, right? If it means anything we do, even one time, then does it have any meaning at all? Like a word that means everything doesn't mean anything.
Well, I feel like that would be the same thing as saying, like, even if liturgies did mean that it was everything, I feel like you would still want to know if you were following something that led in a worldly path or a path that led to God, which personally for me, I want my path to lead eventually to God. And I want to follow habits and rituals that lead me to Him and not keep me apart from Him.
Well said. I think there may be opportunities to come back to what you just said.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
All right. DJ, let me start by saying something very positive. I've read a few things that you've written in your time here. This is your clearest and most precisely written paper that I've seen you write.
I agree completely. Yeah, I agree completely.
I'm just going to read you a sentence that you wrote. Right under well-ordered gloves, you said this sentence: if our liturgies are the things that mold us into our future selves, comma, perfect grammar, let us choose carefully what kind of habits we form, period. I read that and I was like, DJ Scarter, that is a perfect sentence. That is quality grammar and it's precise and it's just well written. It's active verbs all the way through. It's just, that's a great sentence. And there were a lot of those in here and you could just tell that you're writing and matured by the time you'd gotten this paper. None of us write sentences that way to start, so that was probably revised. So good for you for clear writing. Now the questions. I guess my first question is to ask you, is just repeatedly doing a thing automatically going to form you? So what if like my heart's just not in it, right? Is there, because we'll say this thing like, well, I'm going through the motions. And if I repeatedly go to church every Sunday, but in my heart it's a going through the motions thing, then is it forming me? Which kind of brings doubt on whether or not liturgies are as powerful as maybe you're saying. So my question again is it automatic? Do liturgies automatically form us?
I feel like in a way, yes, because I'm just going to come from one point of view. I feel like when you do something so much, like when I played basketball, I played basketball so much, I practiced the shot so much, I practiced the move so much that I wanted to get so good at it and learn it to where I didn't even have to think about it. It was just muscle memory. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that can go along with going to church or whatever it may be as well. And I feel like, yes, a liturgy can become automatic. But I'm going to be honest to the other part of your question. I don't know necessarily if it would form you, if, like you were saying, if you were just going through the motions. Because you made it sound like, yeah, I'm just going through the motions, but at the same time, it's like you don't really care. I know you didn't say that word, but it made it kind of feel like that.
No, that's a good answer. It was a little bit of a trick question, and you went the right way, because I think if you had said that they don't automatically form us, that would have undone a lot of what you were claiming in your paper. So you doubled down, which is a good decision, because I think Augustine and Jamie Smith, who were your primary sources, agree with you. They automatically form us, even if our hearts aren't in it, they still do something. So well done. You got the trick question right. So now I want to ask you a more DJ Scarberry self-reflection question. To have you apply this to your life, I see daily, repeatedly work out. You spend a lot of time at the gym. Yeah. That's a kind of liturgy, right? What does it look like for that to be a good liturgy? What does it look like for that to be a bad liturgy?
I like that. Talking about the gym now, it's my language. I would say the pros to me always like going to the gym. One, it's something that I love. A lot of people think the reason I go is just to look like $1 million, but that's honestly not the truth. It's just it's like therapy to me. It's I don't know, it just calms my mind. And that's why I do so much, is because it's something I love, and it's like a safe place for me. And I'll be honest, going from the other end of it, I I spend so much time in the gym that I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of kept me from doing my homework at times. As Miss Archer probably knows, she's like, yeah, this homework's really bad here. You could tell he was at the gym. But I mean, yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to both sides. One, it keeps me away from a lot of things. I mean, it keeps me away from family a lot. I get home tired. I don't want to do things. Just want to go to sleep. I mean, I could go on and on about pros and cons, but.
So just describe for me two versions, it doesn't even have to be you. Describe for me two versions of somebody who exercises daily. That's a good liturgy and one that's a bad liturgy. Because it's not going to church, so it's not an easy one. It seems like that's easy to say, well, it's a good thing. Is exercise a good liturgy or a bad one?
Well, I would say that somebody who works out daily would need to obviously have their priorities straight. So, like I said in my thesis, obviously have God at the forefront. Like always have Him first, and then working out would come second. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna use this as an excuse, but I'm human, and there's times where I should have put God first, but I decided, you know what, gym's more important. I'm not gonna lie. But I feel like if you were looking at a quote unquote perfect image of somebody that was doing that, they would need to have their priorities straight. Obviously have working out second, and then have everything else fall forward, or even school first, and then go work out. I mean, working out it is about yourself in a sense, because you're looking to better yourself. But also, it's just kind of like an accessory to life. I don't think you can just form your life around that, because everything else has to follow suit. As for somebody that, what'd you say, looks like how did you phrase it?
What would be a version of that liturgy that's the wrong path, the bad version? I think you've answered it. Someone who doesn't have their priorities straight.
I would say, yeah, it's just the opposite. They don't have everything set up, like, because I could have gone to the gym and just not done my thesis. That is a horrible decision, and I'm glad I did not do that, because I would have been up here looking like an idiot in front of all you guys. And I feel like that's an exact example of just only caring about. I feel like if you only cared about going to the gym, since that's the example that we're using, that you'd only be caring about yourself, and that'd be your only priority. That's always the thing that just comes up at the forefront. Nothing else mattered. That's just it.
Thanks, CJ.
I have an application question as well, so since we're kind of talking about it here, I'll throw it in there. I've gone back and forth, and I've actually talked to Mrs. Archer and Dr. Wiley about asking this question, but I think you're doing so well. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it. So last couple of years, the upper school faculty have been have been working to try to work liturgies into the classroom, into the upper school in general. Like, for example, would be the upper school morning meeting. Okay? That is very intentional. That was a very intentional choice on our part to start the day all together with a biblical reading, a prayer, a song. So, as the role model you are, as the senior you are, the person you are, the man you're becoming, what advice would you have to the younger students, maybe the incoming seventh graders, new students to the upper school? What are the benefits of prioritizing Covenant's upper school liturgies, like the morning meeting, or like Mr. Huffman's Bible reading at the beginning of the class, or Dr. Wiley's reading the Proverbs, whatever the case may be, pick whichever one you like. How can those benefit you as an upper school student?
I would say, I'm going to use one example. It's going to actually be the liturgy that we always say in Dr. Wiley's class. We started off this year not like knowing it at all. Like, we had to use the paper. And I mean, it was very hard at first. Dr. Wiley got annoyed a lot of the times we messed up. But eventually, he did. He won't admit it. But eventually, it literally got to the point to where, and I noticed this a couple weeks ago, that barely any of us had our papers out, and we just knew it like right off the bat. And it was pretty crazy to think about, because I was like, I didn't even realize I was learning this that well. And Dr. Wiley said at the beginning of the year, he's like, I think this would be really cool for us to learn. And he got it in all of our heads, and it's pretty crazy to see that. And at that same time, you don't even realize this, but having those words in your head can help you at any moment in time. And I feel like that's one of the big things that he was trying to teach, is that, yes, this may just be a bunch of words on paper, what it looks like now, but it has a deeper meaning for something in the future, if you ever need it during that time. And I think what he was really trying to do is to give you a sense of peace with those words.
And I would add, DJ, that I think what you just said is another answer to Dr. Hector's first question, right? Which is that, does your heart have to be in it? Come on, let's be real. You guys are like pacing all over a room, and you're trying to get your acts together. Like, I sometimes wonder, are we just wasting our time, right, with this liturgy? Just going in one ear and out the other. But then from time to time, I hear a student who's like, I was just walking along, and that liturgy is just like right there, it just popped in my head. Somehow, it's like a stone that sits in a river for a long time, right? As the water rushes over it, right, that stone just gets polished and polished and polished and smooth and smooth and smooth. After a while, that liturgy is doing its work, and you don't even know it.
Dovetailing straight off of what Dr. Wiley was speaking about. So liturgies can also appear in the forms of self-talk, things we tell ourselves inside our head, habits. I'm not a math person. Is it possible to change some of those habits over time to where a person could change their minds about something that they're not comfortable with to get comfortable with? How can those things? Have you noticed? Let me lead you further. When students approach me, and you've approached me, and you say, I don't understand this problem, what do I say to you?
Give me 1 second. Did you work it out?
Well, first thing I say is, did you read it?
That's what I meant.
Okay. Yeah. Because honestly, when students see words, sometimes they say that they do not belong in a math book.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you've noticed, but I lead you through a liturgy. Did you read it? What is it telling us? How can we use it? How can we apply it? The goal is that you will one day start to ask yourself those questions. And I would just like to say that I've seen that happen to where you are attacking problems with a certain tenacity that you did not have even a year ago, where you will read it again on your own, where you will say, when you approach me, you'll say, yes, I've read it. I do know this. Would it be right to think about it in this way? That means that you have practiced those liturgies, and it's already affected a positive change. So, congratulations.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Miss, I am not a math person, liturgy. I did not come here to get attacked in this manner. Okay. Anyway, hi DJ.
How's it going?
Hi. Why is everyone scared of me? I'm not scary.
I don't know. Just the entire day, I was like, "You're a wild card," so I don't know what to expect.
I'm small. I'm not pregnant. Okay. I really love your thesis, partially because it's very practical. Like as I was reading this, I was going, what are my personal liturgies? Like, what are the things that I'm speaking into myself or repeating to myself? Also, there was a sentence like close to the beginning that you wrote. I think it's the first section. No, it's under what is a liturgy. These liturgies of civil religion are disguised acts of idolatry that we have become oblivious to. And I literally wrote in the margins, boom, drop that mic. So well done there. Anyway, my actual question kind of is slightly related to Dr. Hutner's question about like the gym as a liturgy, which is you talk about like good and evil, devoting our time to worldly things or to holy things. And you even touch a little bit later on how to love a created thing and not make it an idol. But my question is more about the things that are morally neutral, right? So some things are like objectively bad and some things are objectively good, but lots of things are morally neutral. There's just what style of music I prefer is morally neutral. That's not like something that the Bible is going to speak into as far as right and wrong goes. Or like Augustine maybe wouldn't agree with me about theater. Like he talked about it as something that provides these like false emotions. Where I, being a storyteller and a literature teacher, would say that story can often teach us things, teach us vital truths. So at what point do I, in morally neutral decisions about my life, how do I know if that's a good liturgy or a bad liturgy? How do I know how the things that are not explicitly good and evil are influencing me?
I feel like, I don't know what exactly it's called, but have you ever had like that innate feeling in your mind where it's like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that? Or like, you know what? Because for me, this is gonna seem like totally weird. If I'm walking through the hallway and like I see like a bottle or a piece of trash on the floor, and then there's like a trash can right next to it, and then I walk past it, I'm like, you actually just did that? And then like I'll go back and like I'll pick it up. Or if I'm just not feeling it that day, I won't, to be honest.
That's objectively bad.
Yeah. But I feel again, I don't want to leave you with this, but like I feel like this is the best answer I have for you right now, is that I feel like God will act upon your heart. And he'll just give you an innate feeling of that is a wrong path that you are following. And if it is a good path, I feel like you'll start to see, I don't want to put it this way, but like blessings from it, or you'll start to see like real positive results, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're getting at how I would have answered my own question, which is like, does this thing stir my affections for Christ or deaden my affections for Christ? So not necessarily asking like, is it good or bad, but what fruit is coming from it? And I think you're getting at that. So,
DJ, I wanted to ask one more question, but rather than we've run you through the ringer for probably more time than we had planned. And you've done very well, and I'm really proud of you for this. This is again, Dr. Hebner hit the nail right on the head. This is the best I've seen from you writing wise. And I'll be honest with you, man, it kind of makes me wish we could keep you around for another year. Just keep working together. So, yeah, we'll let you go. We'll let you go. I think we'll let you go. But anyways, I said I had one more question that I wanted to ask, but I'm going to do what people do at academic conferences, which is rather than ask a question, they pretend like they're going to ask a question, and then they just tell you what they think, right? So that's what I'm going to do. This is a fine thesis, right? It's a solid thesis, and I'm really proud of you for it. In the long run, the thesis isn't what I care about, right? What I care about is who is DJ going to be when he's 40 or 50, right? And this thesis is a tool that we use, right, to help you become the man that God is forming you to be. And so as we wrap up our discussion of your work here, my exhortation to you, rather than a question, would be for you to contemplate in great seriousness and in prayer and in the counsel of Scripture and the Holy Spirit, what are the liturgies that you're going to cultivate in your life? What are the liturgies that you're going to cultivate to pursue a life of prayer and devotion? What are the liturgies you're going to cultivate in college to be a thoughtful and disciplined and dedicated student? What are the liturgies that you're going to cultivate in relationships? What are the liturgies that you want to cultivate when you are a family man? Give careful attention this summer to the things that you love or the things that you want to love but don't yet love enough. And then think very carefully about what it would look like for you to develop fruitful and life-giving, God-honoring liturgies around those loves and that move you closer to those loves. This is the vision, right? It's not yet the plan, and it's not yet the answer. Make this actionable. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well done, brother.
Thank you.
Anybody need a break? We're gonna break for a few minutes. What's that? One more. You good? Since we took a short break right before DJ's paper, and because we're running a little bit behind schedule, we're just going to go straight on through to the next paper, which will be given to us by Mr. Zachary Moore. Zachary's written a senior thesis entitled Living a Meaningful Life, a debate between Augustine and Nietzsche.
Okay. Well, good evening. My name is Zachary Moyer. As Dr. Wiley said, I wrote on a meaningful life and what it means to live a meaningful life. And I used it through the lens, or I talked about it through the lens of Nietzsche and Augustine. My PowerPoint is not working. Okay.
You could take a second if you're fine.
I guess we'll take a second. See if it works. I guess. They're all anti-jokes and nobody laughs at it. Huh? Oh, yes. Mr. Upton, what did one lawyer say to the other lawyer?
I'm a lawyer.
We are both lawyers. Thank you. All right, let's get into it. What makes a life meaningful? This question has haunted the minds of many people for many generations. For that very reason, it must be explored. Two great thinkers, Nietzsche and Augustine, strove to answer this question. And they were both heavily influential to their respective views. Augustine espoused a theistic view and Nietzsche an atheistic view. By looking into both ideas, it will become clear that theism is the only sufficient ground for a meaningful life. There are three principles that are consistent throughout Nietzsche and Augustine's ideas for living a meaningful life. Happiness. What is happening? That is not right. Okay. Happiness, morals, and death. While Nietzsche and Augustine do not share these definitions for these three pillars, they do follow a similar meaning to both philosophers. Happiness creates a life for living. Morals are the how to obtain happiness, and finally, death is a test for a meaningful life. And I believe that if Augustine and Nietzsche were around during technical difficulties, they would have thought a little bit more deeply about nihilism. It's okay. All right. The first point, happiness. Augustine believes that true happiness is only able to be found in God. He comes to this conclusion during a conversation with his mother and some friends. He asks them a simple question. Do you seek to be happy? Of course, their answer is yes. Augustine then reasons that all who are happy have what they want. But this poses a new question. What needs to be possessed in order to be happy? Augustine believes that in order to be happy and to stay happy, one must possess something eternal and never changing. This implies that this thing must be greater than anything worldly, for nothing worldly is constant or everlasting. God is eternal and never changing, therefore he is eternal happiness. Augustine's idea for real happiness and contentment cannot stem from anything except God. Nietzsche, on the other hand, sees happiness stem from success. Success for Nietzsche is becoming a higher being, or the Übermensch. The Übermensch is a being that rises above the normal standards for society and influences that society by contributing new philosophies. Nietzsche's goal is to become that being. While this is a positive idea, is this possible? As we know, humans are naturally inconsistent and subject to change. This creates difficulty for a philosophy to survive. Nietzsche's idea for happiness fails because his ideal human is impossible to create. Augustine's philosophy is difficult to combat, for even the idea of a god produces more consistent happiness than success. The second pillar of a meaningful life, morals. is a topic that both Nietzsche and Augustine go into great detail to define. Nietzsche claims God is dead. This raises many questions about life, but it also damages the idea of morals. If God is dead, then morals die with him. Nietzsche understands this, which is why he claims to be an amoralist. Even though he claims this, he uses morals, or rather virtues, to shape a meaningful life for the Übermensch. Though Nietzsche never defines what he means by virtues, he makes three conclusions about them in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. First, virtues deserve to be used for more than selfish personal gain. Second, virtues deserve unconditional love. And third and finally, virtues leave a mark on the world. These three conclusions Nietzsche makes about virtues are also consistent with Augustine's theistic virtues. While Nietzsche preaches against using virtues selfishly, Augustine preaches humility as the primal virtue. Nietzsche preaches unconditional love towards virtues, and Augustine preaches that unconditional love is a virtue of God and should be expressed. Finally, Nietzsche states that virtue is the light of the world, and Augustine will have to agree, as Christians are called to shine their light of virtue to the world. All that Nietzsche claims of virtues are consistent with Augustine's claims of his virtues, yet they disagree on one key point: the place from which these morals originate. Augustine believes morals originate from God. God, being the creator of morals, becomes the standard by which we should live out our virtue. A standard must be formed in order to believe in morals. Augustine has a standard for which he is able to follow in order to live out a virtuous life. Theism presents a much easier path to self-righteousness than Nietzsche has presented his followers. This contention over a standard for morals confirms Augustine's argument as logically sound, while Nietzsche's lacks a firm foundation. The third and final pillar of a meaningful life is death. Death presents many questions to life and is feared by most because it is the end of life on earth. Instead of fearing death, both Nietzsche and Augustine use death as a way to test one's life as either meaningful or wasted. A little bit more. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche teaches the importance of death as a test. He states, in your dying, your spirit and your virtue should still glow, like a sunset around the earth, or else your dying has failed you. This test is not one which should be feared, but viewed as a benefit. Like any test, the best way to pass is to be prepared. It gives meaning to life by emphasizing a need to produce a fruitful life. In death, one's mark on the earth, placed by virtue, will either live or it will fade along with one's body in death. Augustine views death as a pathway to another life, a greater life with his Savior Christ. In order to achieve this greater life after death, one must believe in Jesus as their true Savior. If one does not believe, then they will perish and fall into eternal suffering in hell. After accepting Christ, Christians are called to live like Christ, that is, following his standard and living out his virtues. Death is not believed by Nietzsche nor Augustine as destructive unless done improperly. Nietzsche sees improper death as dying with no influence or memory left on the earth. Augustine sees improper death as not believing in Jesus, resulting in a fall to hell. Both Nietzsche and Augustine look for hope in death. Nietzsche has hope for future generations, but lacks a hope for himself after death. Augustine also has hope for future generations, but he has hope for himself, for he believes he is dying to live a better life. Augustine's hope in an afterlife and consistency behind his reasons of happiness, morals, and death creates a much more persuasive and logical argument for a meaningful life than Nietzsche's. In conclusion, theism is the only sufficient ground for a meaningful life. Nietzsche searched for meaning outside a God figure, but ultimately his efforts failed because he did not build a firm foundation to live out his teachings logically. Augustine's three pillars are all consistent and connected with each other. They follow logically in pursuit of the same goal, to be as close to God as possible. Happiness is achieved when he has God. Morals come when he listens to God, and through death, he can finally be present with God. Augustine's consistency throughout his beliefs proved to be an effective argument for theism as the only sufficient ground for a meaningful life. Thank you.
Zachary, well done, sir. I've really enjoyed watching this thesis come together over the last 8 months or so. You are asking some really complex questions here, and also some really, really important ones. The question of what does it mean to live a meaningful life? It's foundational. And I love that you have spent the last 7 or 8 months wrestling with that question. I think you've written a really solid thesis. As I've said to you a number of times, I think that you have structured this essay really, really carefully. It has a very coherent arrangement, and there's never a page in which I scratch my head and wonder, where are we and how did we get here? Really well done on the organizational side of things. Also well done on the research side of things. I know that you have gotten pretty deep into Nietzsche and into Augustine, and that's wonderful. You've taken a complex question and answered it with big thinkers, and that's exactly the idea of a senior thesis. That being said, this is where I flip now. This is where I give you a chance to catch your breath, so now it's coming, of course. I'm nervous about your representation of Nietzsche. I'm not a Nietzsche specialist myself, so maybe you can prove me wrong. But for example, I'm on pages 14 and 15 of your essay, where you're discussing Nietzsche's claim that Jesus didn't die at the right time, right? He should have lived longer, and he would have recanted his teachings and these kinds of things and made a better contribution. And I'm frankly not totally sure I follow that line of argumentation. But then at the top of page 15, you write, seeing life through the scope of death creates many opportunities for a meaningful life. Indeed it does. So far I track. The whole idea of a Christian life is to live as Christ, to be sure, who is the prime example of morals and virtues to a Christian. By doing so, Christians benefit the earth while practicing their religious views. Nietzsche's implication that Christ had failed in his death is thereby false. If what makes a successful death is one's virtue living on and affecting the earth, then how did Jesus fail? My question for you is, I'm quite certain that Nietzsche knew about the New Testament. He knew about Jesus' death. He knew about Jesus' teaching. So how is it that we can just so quickly say that Nietzsche basically just got it wrong? Like his claim about Jesus and his ostensibly untimely death is thereby false.
Well, it seems to me when Nietzsche makes that claim about Jesus dying too early or whatever, he makes the claim on the basis that, as you said, if he would have gotten older and been able to mature, he would have recanted his beliefs. But what my argument was in that was that Nietzsche, the whole time through my paper and throughout reading about the Übermensch, it seems like Jesus could have been a prime model for him to take as the Übermensch. It's a man who rose above society, did not conform to the Jewish ways, did not conform to the Roman ways. He, with the rabbi, he talked to them, he was with the sinners. And so he did not conform to society, but he also was able to influence that society. And not only that society,